And this is a good, introduction into the Cyvilan Podcast. And that's what they've been doing. They've been framing the world a certain way. They've intertwined themselves so well in society that you wouldn't even know. This idea of like a thesis, antithesis, synthesis framework to provide problem, reaction, solution scenarios. Two-phase Fabianistic revolution, one violent and one non-violent, to implement the social justice of the common good. And so in Communist Subversion, we go through each one of those. But when we're talking, the New World Order, essentially, these are the concepts we're going to cover: a one world government, a one world religion, a one world currency, depopulation, the rewilding projects, global communism, transhumanism, totalitarianism, and the thing that's going to put an end to the nation states is going to be another revolution. This is the introduction into the Cyvilan Podcast, where we're primarily out of the gate going to cover two narratives. It's going to be the psychological operation that we just spoke about, but there's two versions of it. So most people will know that operation as the New World Order. It's interesting because today they don't call them PSYOPs anymore in the military; they call them military information support. Right? So
rebranding.
You get military information support operations, or MISO, which is what it's called, right? Which is an interesting term, right? For us, we'll be covering both. There's two branches of it. One's we would say is a secular or a sacred version of it, right? So, and all of that means is like within the New World Order, you can follow the strain that has the mystery religions included, or you can follow like the secular branch, which is kind of like the nation states, the corporate states, things like that. They don't have really nothing to do with like any esoteric ideas. And so we want to cover both. In this particular podcast, I think we had decided to start by just covering the secular aspect of it, and then we'll go through that entire series, and we'll circle back.
I'll circle back. I hate to disappoint you. Circle back. That's an excellent question. Circle back. I hate to disappoint you, but we will venture to circle back with all of you.
And once once we do that, we'll come back and kind of repeat, and it's going to provide once you understand the basic structure of it, then you can come back and put some flesh on the bones. Like here's where all the mystery religion stuff comes in, because on one level, everybody that's in the inner circles are initiated.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that's going to be a big portion when you start talking about like the idea that they want to create an enlightened society. As we've pointed out before, not everybody makes it to the future. The future
by
that
Beyonce,
they're
right?
Well, that was Madonna.
Yeah.
And because nobody or not everybody's going to make it, then who are the people that get to participate in this future that they're building? And so we'll
attempt to answer the age-old question: who are the they? Right? Yeah. And who's behind them?
Who's the mysterious they? The puppet masters behind the strings, puppeting the nation states of the world. Who are they, and what are their power structures? And so, if people have watched Communist Subversion 1 or 2, they've heard that phrase before. And we're kind of going to go basically a deep dive. Communist Subversion 1 and 2. When we're done with this, we're going to move into a review of those two. It's so like a slight overview. We're not going to
spend another
spend another 3 or 4 hours.
Those combined are, I think, 3-hour videos.
So if anybody, about 4 hours total.
Exactly. If you're interested and you haven't seen it yet, or you want to re-watch it again, because we're gonna pick up pretty much where that left off. There was going to be another documentary called The Enemies of Civilization we mentioned in the previous one, but instead we decided to do this format. I think it's a lot better. You can get the ideas out in faster and more. The format allows to get more deep dive than actually how we're doing it.
The problem that you run into when you do like some type of documentary like that, like there's the pace. It's so much information. Let's say you would write like 100 or 200 pages. And you're not getting all that, especially in a script format. You're not going to get that into like a video. Plus all the citations that you have to show, right? Because again, the opinion thing, right? People don't want to hear your opinion on something. They want to know like, are you saying anything that's actually factually correct? And so the idea behind what we're trying to do here is kind of say, there's this New World Order idea. It's been lumped into the category of like conspiratorial narratives, and that's created this thing like if you start talking like that, we're just going to dismiss what you're saying.
Exactly.
And as somebody who understands that plot, you understand that that's part of the narrative, right? So for them to just dismiss it as a conspiracy theory.
So in a way, even the splitting of the podcast into two it has the same exact reason behind it too.
Right,
for people that are secular, you know, you bring something religious, all of a sudden, for some reason, we're at the level where you're dismissed.
Right,
you know,
exactly,
it's like, oh, this guy is one of those cool and all that stuff.
That's what
and
they
then
do,
for people that are believers, it's kind of like, you know, easy to dismiss this because like they live in the world of like, this has nothing to do with it, or you can't really see how this connects to it, you know. So for us, we see that they both come in at a nexus point, and it's easy to see it. So the idea is to bring it up.
Yeah. So with that, I would say like once you see kind of like the infrastructure, how it all kind of plays out, how it's been playing out over time, it's easy to kind of say like, oh, I see why they would need to say, you know, put this stuff into like a conspiratorial category. And piggybacking on what you're saying, like religious people, it may be for those that are, especially for if their eschatology includes like, you know, like, oh yeah, we're in the last days. This is kind of like everything's coming to a climax. Yeah. We're at the end of time. This is the, you know, the end of the road for everybody. In that sense, you become like you're just preaching to the choir, like, oh, of course we know this. The Bible's been saying this all along.
In a way, nothing matters type of thing, right? Yeah.
But if you're a secularist, you look at that and go, oh no, another right-wing conservative conspiracy.
Yeah. So also to that too, when it comes to like the format not allowing, because that falls under the bucket of conspiracy. So you do the 6 months of research, a few months of shooting and editing and all that stuff, and then when time comes to post, all that hard work, like just like we've seen with our last Communist Subversion 2, just taken out. Not only YouTube decides that nobody gets to see it, but then we get strike to the point where it's like, hey, one more strike and the whole channel is gone.
Yeah.
You know?
So with that, I would say like the whole being involved in like the New World Order category for me has been like maybe like a 30-year type thing. So I've been familiar with it from way back, right? So and we mentioned previous, like when things start happening and the outbreak thing kind of happens, people now are kind of reading like, you know, the Lockstep document from the Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah. But if you've been familiar with the Rockefeller Consortium took over from the Cecil Rhodes Milner Roundtable groups, and when those guys died off, the Consortium took over. And if you've been reading that stuff the entire time, you understand that it was those guys that presented those ideas to you in the conspiratorial sense to make you think those are like Looney Tune people that are out there doing that. Again, in the way that it's structured, so you get like the rings within rings of power in some type of pyramidal type structure, which is why that symbol is so prominent. If you were to go to the people that are in those circles, like, you know, the average guy at the Council on Foreign Relations or the Bilderberg Group or the Club of Rome or any of these places, are you guys trying to take over the world? What are you guys trying to do? Those people that you can actually approach like that wouldn't be the type of people that be like, yeah, that's the one thing that we're trying to do. But if you understand from their writings, the things that they actually produce that you can point to, this is why the quoting becomes so important, right? So in the secular sense, because you want to be able to establish that, hey, this is not like speculation. It's not like, you know, I just watched a bunch of news clips and piecing the news clips together, it looks like there's this idea that's floating around. You get from a very real academic sense, you know, guys that, you know, we could easily point to and be like, okay, Arnold Toynbee, John Ruskin, Cecil Rhodes, Carol Quigley. These are the type of characters that, you know, especially if you read Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American Establishment, there's no way you're going to walk away from that thinking like, A, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or B, that this is some type of quack. Even though you get like the kind of like effort to dismiss the things that Quigley says, right? So
I would say the only good thing that came out of all this, you can tell that people are willing to more actually for like to go and look for good information, you know, something that has some merit to it rather than, so before you would see like even in the comments and all that stuff where, you know, usually something when it comes to conspiratorial, let's say I'm interested in this, I would watch it and the first comment would be, source trust me bro, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's less and less that because a lot more people are doing a lot more research and there's a lot more good videos out there, you know, kind of researching and then documenting what's going on. Because when event like this happens, where it's like good crisis, you can't let it go to waste. There's a lot of stuff happening. Everything is planned out for years. And it's kind of hard for like, let's say just two of us to keep track of everything. So it's good to see like a lot more people doing a lot more like tracking, researching, and then documenting and all that stuff.
I mean, that's really good. And so, you know, it's interesting with that because, you know, as you consume a lot of this stuff, you can see like certain people are really good in certain areas, right? But you can always see
the missing part, right?
If this was if this person was to speak to this person, and they were to talk to this person, right? You can kind of like see the puzzle kind of coming together more clearly.
And for you, it's like also even when it comes to like religious aspects too, right? So there are people that we watch and they have some good information and good knowledge when it comes to like a lot of things that they dedicated their whole life to one thing, you know? And then you're like, but you're just missing this one thing. If you can just talk to this guy that he dedicated his whole life to this, you know?
And so when the data starts to overlap, right? So there's certain things, like especially when, you know, this is the Cyvilan Podcast, but in terms of like eschatology is the study of end times, and then soteriology, the study of like, you know, how somebody is saved. Like, so you get all these people that are really good in certain doctrines or explaining things a certain way. So you can be an expert, but you can't explain stuff. You're useless, right? So you'll usually write a book and then I'll read the book and that type of thing. But there's certain guys that are kind of like good at, you know, understanding the information and relaying the information into like in a consumer friendly format. This is one of the things that we talked about. We've always wanted to do was like create some type of conference where through either our efforts here or some other means, we bring those minds together, and then we're able to kind of piece together the parts where we think that either one person is missing out, or, you know, they're strong in these areas but they're weak in these areas, and kind of like complement one another. And so use the idea from, you know, the biblical parlance, like we're all part of the body of Christ. We come together, and, you know, you're just as necessary as I am. Right? We all have a role to play. I can't play your role. You can't play mine. But that's, you know, that's for another podcast, right? So, but for this type of stuff here, so we want to kind of give them an overview on, you know, the stuff that we want to cover here. The idea of like what all does the New World Order entail? When you hear those terms, obviously, if you post a video on YouTube, the first thing that's going to pop up is that thing at the bottom, that little banner that they put. It says New World Order Wikipedia article that's a conspiracy theory. The first thing that's going to pop up. Right? So, but now that, you know, you can string together probably from their own mouths, probably going back. So the New World Order, legitimately, before we get into that, us explaining what we think it is, you can legitimately string together a whole bunch of quotes from guys going back, you know, 30, 40, 50 years. And so, there's this progress that's made, like, you know, can refer to American hegemony, right? So, hey, you know, America's the sole superpower. As we take over, we're kind of like the tip of the spear going into the world, and now we're kind of setting the precedent for everybody else. So it's a new world order. We have a base currency that's the currency that oil is traded in. So
petrodollar.
It's basically our dollar. So when you look at like this, now it's known as the Pax Americana, right? And that's based on the old idea of the Pax Romana, where nobody was able to confront Rome because of their military power. We are kind of like the parallel to that today. Nobody can confront America because of our military power. And so, you're going to have some, you know, ebbs and flows in that. If you look at the statistics on like military personnel over time, like going back, you know, 50, 60 years, the progression that's made, and then you see the uptick in technology, the military industrial complex, how much money we've been spending on the military. It doesn't matter if you have 1 million troops, if I can push a button and take you out in 5 seconds, right? So,
I mean, even the idea of like right now, the relevant thing is the gas and the gas prices, you know, the consumption. What we're being told is now that people are coming off a pandemic and they're using more gas, more demand means higher prices. But people we're number 3 when it comes to in America using gases, right? So we talked about this the other day. Number 1 is military.
Military, agriculture,
and then agriculture, and then we have this one, right? So we're spending a lot of money on military, that's for sure.
We are, right?
To the point where we can leave $85 billion worth of equipment somewhere, which makes it like makes it like in Europe, even NATO countries. I think Turkey has the number 1 military, and they're about 80 billion. So we left 5 billion more of their annual whatever they spend on their army. You know? So
I mean, that idea is that's the military industrial complex. So the idea was, you know, we don't want to, after we emerge victorious as the sole superpower, we're not going to scale back the American muscle. What we're going to do is ramp it up. And so now, if you look at all the companies like are making Vanguard and BlackRock, and so
they recently passed the $10 trillion mark.
But I mean, they're managing assets of paramilitary corporations, right? So, and when you look at that, you go, well, we've dumped so much money into defense, and so for good reason. If you're
it's a good title, defense. We haven't had to defend against anything if you think about it.
And then you look at like directed energy weapons, the amount of research that's gone through that, DARPA, Monitor Corp, the Jason Group. There's a whole bunch of those guys, and that's good stuff that we're going to get into later, because a lot of people wouldn't know like the Jason Group, or Monitor Corp and stuff like that. So like Lockheed Martin on all those guys, but there's a whole bunch of like subsidiaries and guys that were reaping a lot of money during the Cost Plus program.
Yeah, we mentioned a lot of them in the Communist Version 1 and Communist Version 2.
Yeah, with the Cost Plus stuff. So, and the Transatlantic Traders, Blackwater, Khaki, Keller, Brown and Root, all those guys. Yeah. But so if you're moving this thing towards a one world government.
So if the question is, what is the one world, the
New World Order?
Yeah, New World Order.
Yeah. So well, we were not going to answer that in this one. This is just an introduction, like a Kickstarter. But these are the type of ideas that we're going to cover, and we have some slides that perhaps we can kind of share on either the archive website that we want to build, or we can just stick them on Iconic Label somewhere, like a one-off place where they can download them.
Yeah.
But when we're talking, the New World Order, essentially these are the concepts that we're going to cover: a one world government, a one world religion, a one world currency, this concept of depopulation, the rewilding projects, global communism, transhumanism, totalitarianism, which is going to lead to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We're going to talk about how revolutions have been instrumental in like making the change from monarchies over to nation states. And so the outgrowth of that was a strong middle class that wanted to participate. And then those guys wanted to participate in their political futures. They didn't like the divine right of kings idea. And so, you get this birth of like the corporations or the corporate state, right? And that's going to go through its progression. And the thing that's going to put it into the nation states is going to be another revolution, which Klaus Schwab is so famously talked about, the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
He's becoming the next famous guy. Somehow Fauci disappeared, and you have a new evil guy everybody's watching for,
Yeah, it literally looks like Dr. Evil. And so... but we still have to go back and make sure that people understand the history of it, right? So you have to understand the Rhodes-Milner Roundtable group. So Cecil Rhodes and his 7 wills, he leaves that aside. He creates a secret society. And the idea was to galvanize the world's wealth, run the wealth through central banks, set up different foundations and funds like the Rhodes Scholarship. Because when they die, they need to pass this idea down to the next generation. So, and then with that, the 7 mountains of influence. Where do people go to get their information? And then, which groups did they found? The Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Club of Rome, Budapest, and Madrid. And then what did those guys produce for us, right? So you get, U.S. Federal Reserve System, the League of Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, and the list is long.
It's massive. So the idea is that all these companies, they don't just pop out of nowhere.
No.
What it reminds me of? Like kind of when you look at animation, every single part of it, it's not randomly there. Somebody had to sit down and it was drawn, and there's a purpose to it, whether it's like as a background or whatever.
Yeah, or look at film. So film, you have 4 corners, and then you get to control everything that somebody's going to hear and see in that frame. And that's what they've been doing. They've been framing the world a certain way, and people have rightfully pointed out, like, they're in control of the educational system. That's not a new concept. Where do you think it came from? Is the
that was their goal, to be there, and they're there. It didn't happen to.
It wasn't like it happened and then it was hijacked. They've hijacked other things, but these are integral growth. It's kind of like, to use another I guess biblical phraseology or whatever, let the wheat and the chaff grow together, right? So they've mixed these things, and they've intertwined themselves so well in society that you wouldn't even know that something that you see as normal, like a normal organization, or that they would have these type of agendas built into the actual framework, and that. Well, some of these things, kind of like if you read like Zygmunt Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard, like, the rise and fall of nations is kind of like, do we need a nation over here? If we do, then we'll erect one. If we don't need one, then we'll get rid of this guy. We'll put this over there, and we'll redraw the maps around these resources and put these guys against these guys. It's that type of thing, right?
It's like when you said you always have like a plan to start and then exit strategy, right?
That's what you mentioned. So, I'm reminded of that because of with 119, you get like when they build the towers, they have to have like how you're going to construct it, but how you're going to deconstruct it or something. And so now that ties into like the plan for like demolishing. So, but if it happens to be some type of an attack, then you don't need that plan anymore, and you save the type of money that would cost you to.
Then you're just happy you had insurance.
Or you're happy that you upgraded your insurance policy.
Two different insurances.
Because it's two separate attacks. Nonsense, right? So, but other things, right? So we want to reveal like the tactics, the strategies, the blueprints, and so what's actually on the back of the hoodie is kind of like so this idea of a thesis.
Show image of it. I can't turn around right now.
so this idea of like a thesis, antithesis, synthesis framework to provide problem, reaction, solution scenarios where you go through this two-phase Fabianistic revolution, one violent and one non-violent. And so what is it there to do? Is to implement the social justice of the common good. And so in communist subversion, we go through each one of those, like, and so we'll make like a little bit of that statement, and then like, oh, here is how they're doing it, right? So, and they do it by stealth and secrecy through peace and politics, by the 4 stages of ideological subversion, which comes from Bezmenov, right? Demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and then normalization. If you notice, we're kind of moving into the normalization phase, right?
Everything seems to be going back to normal.
And so, but as Bezmenov said, when he talks about, when the tanks moved in, it's kind of like now the situation has
when
normalized.
The Soviet tanks moved into Poland, the situation has been normalized.
Right. And so the idea is to reveal like who are the key players. Like when you hear things like the global outbreak, what's behind that? So that has a long history. People think like the protein that's injected that has a long history, right?
Steroids.
Steroids, yeah. And so the idea of all of the, I don't want to say stuff because we were so on the brink of like getting everything deleted. It's kind of like you got to tiptoe around these things and walk on eggshells.
I think everybody kind of gets it, So they're just
So, but that leading into dovetails into Klaus Schwab's book, COVID-19 and the Great Reset. Don't let a good crisis go to waste. That crisis management stuff is what these roundtable groups were set up to do, to create the problem, reaction, solution scenarios. And now, as you see, we're going to move, the COVID crisis moves you into the climate crisis. The first person was now diagnosed with climate change.
Interesting.
And so that's going to move into what we'll cover later in the God, King, Father, Friend podcast, which is Sunday law. That's going to be another, because the environment needs to rest, and we already have all the Protestant world resting on this day, so we'll get the rest of the world to rest on Sunday because of the environment. That's
when 2 years ago, the 2 weeks to flatten the curve came out, the first thing we started seeing, the first reports were like, hey, this is really good for the ozone layer. The Earth has finally can rest and kind of rejuvenate, bring recover some of the ozone layer that we've been destroying.
And so when you think of so normally when you hear we're going to rest on Sunday, that idea is, if you're talking Genesis parlance, rest does not mean sleep or
take a nap.
It don't mean any of that, right? So rest means rulership. So if you're going to rest on Sunday, you're going to rule on Sunday. That's what the idea is, right? So which is why God rests on the Sabbath day, right? So because He's taken up His rulership. What did He do on the 8th day? He ruled. What did He do on the 9th day? He ruled, right? So and then you get the Sabbath, which is the memorial of creation week, and this is my memorial for all times, is what He says, right? So we'll get to that.
We'll be more in detail for God, King, Father, Friend. This is like a snippet of what you can see, what it's going to be about.
There's a ton of stuff in there. So another thing is, we'll cover the World Economic Forum, because that's not a new thing either.
That
right?
too,
so it goes back to the 70s.
It doesn't just happen to come like, hey, all of a sudden we have this organization that this is what they do, and all these world's young leaders somehow, they're part of this fourth industrial change, and then they're all champions for all,
So and all of your quote unquote young world leaders are part of the young world leaders, right? So, and that's under the World Economic Forum, and they were trained to do what they're doing today. So if you don't like what they're doing, then you can trace the policies of their training to the World Economic Forum, and so that traces to Henry Kissinger. So,
in 70s, were you saying, right?
And so what they said, they had a problem that they were trying to solve that they had created, and it really had to do with population reduction. but they were reducing the population in Western world, and they wanted to reduce it in their quote-unquote third world, which was something that they wanted to correct now. And so that was kind of like the precursor, and the World Economic Forum is like a small piece of a puzzle when you're comparing them to like the Club of Rome, Budapest, and Madrid, or any of the other players that we can kind of name through here. And then you get, transhumanism, climate change, Sunday law. We already talked about that. We're going to cover that. Another thing that we want to cover is kind of like the secret society stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about last time, there's the secret social societies, and then there's the secret societies. Right?
Yeah.
So the secret social society is the Club of Rome, the Bilderberger is the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the World, and there's a whole bunch of institutes of international affairs, and we'll detail, we'll probably should provide like a chart so everybody can see all that stuff, because it's kind of in depth, and all of it's connected to like all your institutions. Right? So there's a ton of institutions: the Aspen Institute, the Brookings Institute, the Stanford Institute of Research. There's a whole bunch of that stuff, and so, but then you have your secret societies, and so your secret societies: the Templars, the Rosicrucians, the Jesuits, the SMOM, Opus Dei, the Cathars, the Brotherhood of the Cross, Order of St. John. Scottish and York Rite Freemasonry, and then like Skull and Bones, Dagger and Quill, Scroll and Key. The idea is you go through all the different pieces of this concept, and then once you get who the key players are, what the key institutions are, what the structures of power that they set up, how they work throughout nation states, how they've governed the world, as it were, from behind the scenes. In this second version, what we would call the sacred version, or that includes the mystery religions version of the New World Order, is when you bring in this idea of divine right of kings. And so if you just want to appease an audience that says like, hey, I'm not interested in all that religious stuff that they've lumped in together with it, if these people have that ideology, that's fine, but I want to know what they're doing in real world events, right? So how do we know that they're behind these wars? How do we know that it's their businesses that are polluting the environment? How do we know?
And that's the beauty, right?
Yeah.
They admitted themselves.
So that is the good piece, right? So and so from the first version of this, we show them that piece. Here's them in their own words saying what they do. Here's how they appoint the next rulers. Here's the how they work behind the scenes.
So
here's
for
their future
everybody
goals.
that doesn't know, like Communist version 2, it's a 3.5 hour long, and most of it is quotes, right?
Yeah, it's just reading stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So but so when we include the mystery religions, that's going to open up a whole another can of worms. And so here's where a lot of people that are involved in this subject, they camp out on kind of like Luciferianism. And so you'll see like a lot of focus around that, and or the Luciferian aspects of it, the satanic aspects of it, which are really those kind of sit on top of like this pantheistic idea, because included in the mystery religion concepts is this the idea that all the religions of the world are just kind of like the exoteric doctrine. So interwoven is this idea of a two doctrine policy. There's what the adepts believe and what the outer people are actually taught. What do we teach to the masses? And so, outwardly it's this particular religion, but inwardly this is the secret doctrine, right? And so we want to, tell the people what the secret doctrine is, what their goals actually are, what's the actual ideology that drives somebody to do this, somebody who has all the money, all the power, all the resources.
So there's a lot of people there in a group of, and I was there a couple of years ago, under the idea of religion is just like a mass population control. If you can get a whole bunch of people that there is somebody watching over and is going to punish you if you do bad, then you choose what's good, what's bad, and then they're going to follow it, right? But then the idea of seeing all these powerful people, rich people, like you were saying, the ones that have everything, and the stuff that they do, and who they think, and what rituals and stuff like that you do. And it's kind of like, wait a minute. So here I am thinking that smart people don't do any of this, and I'm smart, I'm outside of it. I don't believe this fictional character that will do this. But you do, and you have all these powers and all that stuff, but you do to the wrong one, or at least now I would say, right? But you whatever they believe that their right God is, and then you do all these rituals and stuff like that. So something that isn't right? For the very least, it was worth looking into it, right?
So it's interesting, right? So, and I don't think that's kind of like where most people would start, right? It's kind of, this is interesting.
Yeah.
And so, but once you kind of like peek over the edge to see what's actually there, it's kind of like, there's no way these people
talk about a slippery slope.
It's one of those. So there's that article. That I forget who published it. Don't go down the rabbit hole. Is that kind of like a the don't trust your own research type thing?
Yeah.
So.
CNN had something like that too. You would come to us, and I think it was, I forgot what it was about, but it's like, you come to us and we tell you what it means.
No thanks, Ministry of Truth, right? So, so with those concepts, you get this this idea of like the wealthiest, the most powerful, the ones that are kind of what it looks like they're sitting on top of the pyramid. They seem to have this allegiance to what most people consider like something it seems to be sinister or evil, and it wouldn't be. It's obviously something that's like hidden in a shroud of mystery, right? So. Kind of like there's a whole bunch of things that you have to pull apart there, because there's different levels of all those different things, right? So when you start talking about Luciferianism versus Satanism, right? So most people don't know that there's distinctions between the two, and then like the New Age movement is kind of like the new movement for the New World Order. That is the one world religion concept, because you get this idea of pantheism, that God is the universe, right? So
we all one part of universe.
So not that God is manifest in the universe, panentheism, but God is a part of the universe, right? So you're just as much as God as God is, so to speak, right? So, and then you get those. There's some videos that we're going to put in Enemies of Civilization that have like these people proclaiming, I am God, that type of thing, right? So because that concept satisfies both the secular and the sacred mindset. Why? Well, it doesn't matter if you believe in this God thing at all. If this is going to benefit the environment, and we all share the same environment, so I can get along with those type of policies, because they're going to do something that's going to benefit the environment that we live in. You can worship the environment if you want to. It's irrelevant to me, but I'm willing to take care of it, and on that we have common ground.
And you're still going to support their policies, and you're going to go along with it. So again, to put it biblically, your right hand would do whatever, they're going to put the idea in your head, and you're going to act like it.
So Mark of the Beast stuff, right? So, and that's always an interesting category. We can go through all those different views too, but specifically the idea is on, God says, I will write my laws on your right hand and on your forehead, so as you think, you act. So, but the beast, what does the beast do? You're going to put the mark on your right hand or your forehead. I don't care if you believe any of this stuff, but you better act like you do, right? And if you don't act like you do, then now here comes the enforcement mechanism. He calls us all both small, poor, rich, and bond, male and female, to receive a mark on your right hand and forehead. You can't buy, sell, or trade unless you have the mark of the number of the beast. And so this is where you get the 666 from. This is wisdom. Let them count, for the number of the beast is 606. That's King James Version, but there's all of this stuff that's kind of tied into these ideas, and it's interesting when you read kind of like a lot of the works of like Alice A. Bailey or Blavatsky or any of those, and because those are the works that were responsible for, so Alice A. Bailey, she takes over the Theosophical Society after Blavatsky dies, and so you have this idea of like theosophy, and theosophy becomes like this driving force in the UN policies, and so that's like Robert Mueller, who comes up with the World Core Curriculum, he bases those ideas off of the Theosophical Society and the writings of Alice A. Bailey. And so you get this idea of the New World servers, and the hierarchy will reveal themselves, the spiritual hierarchy that kind of governs the scenes from behind, and they will reveal themselves, and you get this, they start getting some dates set like around the 2025 era, and 2025 is when it's supposed to get SPARS, the St. Paul acute respiratory syndrome, from the same guys that gave us.
So would you say it's kind of like, back in time when the whole school system is being built, and it kind of, with the revolution that was happening at that time, you needed factory workers. You don't need thinkers, you need workers, right? So there's a system set up to raise the next generation of workers. So do you see the same thing happening for the fourth industrial revolution?
Zero. No. So it's the opposite, right? So now you got to follow the concept, right? So now under the first real revolution that produced this thing that was a rival to monarchies was the Industrial Revolution, right? So as people, as the peasant class rises up and they start to get their own wealth, they want to participate in their political future. Yeah. And so they're looking at the monarchies and they're like, why do you guys have this ridiculous divine right of kings to rule? I have just as much wealth, or collectively we have just as much wealth as you.
We can get our own army and fight you. Yeah.
Exactly. And why wouldn't we do that, right? So, and then you get this idea of like, only those who, land ownership becomes very important and only those people have rights. And so now you start getting this huge buildup, and this is going to be used by another entity that kind of brings about other revolutions. So a technological revolution brings forth the wealth of the middle class. The middle class then wants to participate in their political future. They see this monarchy thing as kind of like a hindrance, and so now you're putting a ceiling upon our ability to kind of keep rising up. And so, we have to overthrow you. So the smart kings were like, hey, I'll partner with you. The kings that refuse to see the sign or see the writing on the wall, those ones lost their heads. Yeah. And so now, as you follow this concept through, you get this birth of the middle class, right? So this aristocracy starts to arise. And so with the rise of the middle class, you have, kind of like ranks within the middle class as well. And as they want to participate in their political future, monarchies start to become the thing of the past, right? So you have this rise of revolution. So you're going to get one of the main revolutions that does this is what's known as the French Revolution. And so the French Revolution is such a important piece of this overall architecture of this New World Order thing, because it reveals so much. Because
it ties in with the God, King, Father, Friend aspect of it too, right?
Yeah. So you have all these things
because they didn't only throw away just the kings, but there's like the religious aspect of it too, right? So that's when they'll be the gods of their own lives type of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
So you're gonna get the first, the Declaration of Human Rights, right? So and the originators of those documents, we're gonna find out later. There's always two things at play, right? So no matter how one-sided one of these events may be, there's always like the esoteric and the exoteric. There's this outward, like, yeah, this is what's happening. We want our freedom. We want all of these quote unquote liberties. And then there was somebody behind the scenes who was like, I'm going to use that concept to rile these people up to go after these type of ideas to get rid of these monarchies, because these monarchies are rivaling my power. Yeah. And then once I've expanded this empire thing technologically, then I'm going to systematically remove. So I'm going to be the cause of this whole thing to go from monarchies to nation states to corporate states to a global state, of which I'm then going to rise back to the top of that power structure in a feudalist fashion to control it all. And it's going to be done so technologically. It's going to be so well done technologically that the idea to break apart from it is going to be almost unthinkable. Because at the same time, you need to reduce the population, right? So if you think about like why population control is such an important piece to this, when the monarchies had their populations, they were relatively small. You had all these standing armies that were taken care of by the nobles. They were paying all the bills, and the peasants were working in the fields. They're providing all the crops and stuff like that. And so, what's a small manageable population? As those guys start to have their own money supply, and they don't really need me anymore, my military. What do? Now they're going to educate themselves. They're going to educate their children. They're going to live longer. They're going to eat better food. Man, they're everything that
taking your resources.
They're playing in my space. So there's a really good documentary. It's called "Everything's a Rich Man's Trick." It's not really this type of stuff, but that concept of like the rich wanted to remain in power, and they're really crafty behind the scenes, because if you have money and power, you're kind of like you're not doing stuff but thinking predominantly, right? And you're aligning yourself with better thinkers that are outthinking your competition, that type of thing. But at the end of this road, you kind of get this idea of like this thing kind of comes full circle. And what happens? Well, in order to get rid of this thing that I've created to overthrow the monarchies to give rise to the corporate state, I need to get rid of this middle class thing again and get back to a smaller, manageable population size. So that technologically now I can do what my vassals and kings or my vassals, my lords, and my military were doing back in the day. Which now, when you mentioned the jobs and stuff like that earlier, you get this idea of like they're not preparing people like for factories and stuff like that. So the
idea was back then you're preparing somebody for the American dream. So factory, you're going to work and then buy a home, be happy. So now the new American dream would be you'll own nothing, you'll be happy. And the next generation is being reasoned, and then the way they're being there's kind of like conditioned to be the next
serf population, really.
Exactly. Yeah. So
because there's going to be less of them, they're going to be less educated. Exactly. They're going to have, there's a lot of videos on it now, but they're going to have, you see all like the fake trees or the GMO trees and the GMO foods and all that kind of stuff. Everything's kind of being genetically modified along with the people themselves, right? And so
to become like a world citizen, right? So now you're not being taught to be your own sovereign being that's going to go achieve something, but you're going to be taught to be this part of the society that they've created.
Yeah, a world society.
Exactly.
The collective whole. Yeah. Right, the hive mind. It's all that same stuff.
And you will actually be happy by owning nothing because everything will be given to you as long as you go with the flow.
And
right?
so this is in biblical parlance, this would be like, the Revelation 13. He's going to control everything, and you can't buy, sell, or trade unless you have the mark of the number of the beast. And the mark it's not going to be a computer. It's not a computer chip. It's not an implant. It's not a tattoo. It's none of those things, right? So, so you get this idea that these the middle class is really the target because only. And we talked a little bit about it last time, where you have, who would be able to stand against you in this type of scenario. Yeah. And so people that are, strong. I mean, strong in what way? Well, physically, they can physically remove you.
They can do something. Yeah.
And so, well, that's a problem. So, but if they're strong but they don't know nothing, then, it's like a bear. Yeah. So it's like I can put you behind. I can put you in a zoo in a cage, and you're good, right? You're not smart enough to break your way out. You're not going to make a tool or anything like that. So. But if you have an education, right? So and we don't really mean like a college degree type education.
Because clearly nowadays that doesn't mean anything.
Right. So I would say people get their ticket punched for different reasons, but so you would want a male population that's educated, that can actually physically do something, right? So, which is why you take all those people and you make them Call of Duty. Here's this video game, right? So now you can satisfy that testosterone by sitting there at a computer screen, but your avatar, the person that's running around in the game, is like an amazing warrior, but the person that's behind that on the keyboard and the controller, they're not so not so much of a threat, right? So, and then at the same time, the younger generations are taught to be less aggressive, right? So we talked a little bit about sports. So you're giving them participation trophies, and that you're going to blur the lines between a whole host of categories to make a weaker population. And then there's that phrase, strong men create.
Yeah, strong men create good times. Good men. I guess strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men.
There you go, right. So the cycle repeats. Yeah. Right? So, and that's kind of what we see. And so, but as you go through those cycles, if I know that that's the case, and I have the ability to affect that, and I know that that's the one thing that stands between me and reaching my end goal, then 100% I'm gonna make sure your new standard of strong is a lot lower than the previous standard. So you have these guys that 20-year-olds jumping off on D-Day going to their deaths versus people. It's like, it's a different era, and people. To understand that it's engineered that way, right? So because this whole concept of the New World Order, right? So we've talked a little bit about like some of the stuff that's going on, and there's some clear transition points that are going to be made, right? So we're going to see like the rise of like top-down surveillance, right? So people forget that, like, so if we mention like the social credit score of China, it's built off the framework of the Social Security infrastructure here in the United States, right? So our same companies export that concept, and now the Chinese were like, we can use that for a social credit score. Why are you just using it for like finance?
Yeah,
right?
and then like you say, now them having like full control over their tech companies and all that stuff, they have the ability to have all this facial recognition. They have 2 cameras per person, which they have the number 1 population when it comes to number wise, So it's just crazy, incredible how fast they can move on. And for people that think that that's not coming here, it's just
right. And so on top of that, right? So you look at like the military power that we have, not in terms of like exporting force in the world, but like in terms of what we mentioned before in Communist Subversion 1 and 2, which is the 5 Eyes, the 7 Eyes, the 9 Eyes, and the 14 Eyes alliances, right? So these are security surveillance alliances that we've made with intelligence of other nation states of the world, and we share all of this information, right? So but the architecture, the thing that supports that, are private corporations, right?
So that comes to, in the first episode, we talked about a little bit about, as nations, you have very limited amount of stuff that you can do, which is like, if you want to spy on your own people, you need something like that, where you would let Great Britain to do it and then share. But if you have tech companies, something like Facebook, that has over 2 billion or 3 billion now combined all together, and then you willingly go and give them your data, they don't need, like you said, the imaginary line of nations and all that stuff. It's all gone, and they have all that power of to our horror, people willingly went and give on day to day, time to time, what they're doing, where they stand.
The same thing. So if imagine you go to somebody and say, hey, give me your name, your address, your email, your telephone number, get out of here. Hey, I'll give you this this thing to network with your friends and family, but you give me all that information, you sign this little agreement, and I'm going to be able to sell that information on the back end. And so there's a whole bunch of like good documentaries that are kind of like on each piece of that, like what each company does with your data, and how that affects, like, how you're served up ads. Like, you could be talking about something next time we pick up our phone 10 minutes from now, like, hey, there's there's an ad on something that we were talking about, right? So the ability to serve all those things up, like wholesale in real time, is very important if you're an advertiser, right? But if you're in the security business, then it becomes
even more important.
It's a little bit more important, right? So we're gonna get to like the World Army, right? So they're crafting NATO as kind of like this infrastructure thing for like the World Army, and you look at like a world constitution, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and so you don't need the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the United States anymore. You now need this World Charter again, because you have a global market, you have a global economy, you have all these things that you can put global next to, and then you have national policy. That don't really fit, because you're only looking out between these borders and boundaries that, yes, you spilt blood over these things.
It's a bottleneck, you know what I mean? You want it to be like nice and beautiful. And don't worry, some of these rights that you have, we'll have them here too. So what's the difference,
So if you're a business and you're sharing this product or service across national lines, there's a whole bunch of things that are kind of you can either be a hindrance to a nation state, right? So or you can wield the power, right? So think about it, right? So now you have nations being like Russia. They're saying like, hey, Visa says your credit card no longer works for in this entire nation, right? So if you look at BlackRock and hey, we manage $10 trillion in assets. That's greater than the GDP of most countries.
We disagree what Russia is doing, so we're going to do something about it.
So, but they can do something about it without there being some type. The idea is this gets done without some type of elected official, right? So when you're able to create an entity that can circumvent any elected official, so you don't need the democracy. You don't need all these political models anymore. You don't need those anymore. Why would we handcuff ourselves with those ideas?
It fascinates me how good they are at what they do. So a few months ago, people wouldn't even know where Ukraine is. I live with a Ukrainian. So when it came to the time where it's like, hey, where are you from? And you say Ukraine, it was easier to say Russia, just so they leave you alone. Because where is that? What it is? So like, not that, same thing with me. I'm Armenian, but I would say Russia just so they can leave me alone. in LA, everybody knows what Armenia is, but outside of that, it's kind of like you have some explaining to do, right? So 2 months ago, everybody is at that level of, oh, where's that and stuff like that. And then now all of a sudden, you have people in unanimous support for Ukraine, which I'm not saying don't support them, but on the other hand, you have 150 million of other people that don't really want this war. These are brother states. They're people that, intermarrying and all that stuff. They have family members and all that stuff. So not everybody wants this war. But all of a sudden, all these sanctions and all this stuff that's being done to the 150 million people, all these people that feel good by having the Ukrainian flag or painting their nails or... We've seen some crazy stuff, right? Standing naked with Ukrainian flag all over you. None of that really does anything. But supporting companies punishing some other people all of a sudden becomes like this normal, I have Russian friends too, and it affects them in a bad way, and they're not really for the war. Most of them are already here, and then but they still have families there. They don't want the war.
Right. And so, I mean, getting into like the real, ideas behind these wars is always a fun piece, right? So you get all the lithium that's there, right? So, and then that is going to tie into the green policies because, if you're going green, then you're going to need batteries and, electricity.
The whole Build Back Better deal is if you need lithium for everything that you want to do, pretty much,
And then you look at like all the biolabs that were there. That initially, there's no biolabs, and now there's all these biolabs that are there. And so there's a whole bunch more things that
the war is being
into.
used for, like, again, if you look at what Trudeau did in Canada with these emergency powers and stuff like that, now Zelensky is doing in Ukraine, such as like, now under this unanimous Information Act or whatever. Now he controls all media. All media becomes state-controlled media. That's not far off what Russia had under USSR about 30 years ago. Old media was state media. They controlled it. And then now you have him getting rid of all these. I think about 11 political parties that are against him. That they have Russian ties all of a sudden. So what's going to happen? They're gone too. So now you have one hero guy that's there to protect their country, and I feel bad for
nobody's there. Remember Reagan, the 7th? I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
The 8 most the scariest word like a politician can tell you, right? And I feel bad for the people that are caught in between this. It's like you didn't choose this. Like again, when you talk to anybody from there, it's like, well, the NATO gives you the ability to freely travel. And we like that. You don't have to go through this visa process 3-4 months or whatever you can. That's all they want. They don't really want to be like,
So I mean, that's the whole idea of creating something that that somebody is gonna. It's kind of like what you do in business. You get your hooks in. I know you like to travel. We know that you like to. We get a list of things because we have all your data. We know exactly what you like, and we're going to use that as leverage against the policies that we want to pass. So if you like all of these, kind of like with this idea of like, you remember the Canadian Minister of Health? She was on like. Now is the time to kind of like put all the hooks in, right? So if we can dangle the carrot in front of them, because if we just open up and we haven't passed all these measures, then we lose the ability, right?
We also had on CNN the lady, I forgot her name. She was like the head of Planned Parenthood too. I think she's like a doctor at CNN, saying that right before like Texas started opening up, Florida opening up, what she was saying is like we have to tie all this opening back up to vaccines, because then people are going to start doing what they want to do, and we can't use the vaccine as a leverage for them to get back to normal. You know what I mean? And that was televised, and people that watch that type of stuff, they're like, like saying, like, wait a minute, what are you saying? I mean, it's so we have an outbreak that works completely different based on, it's like time zones. You know what I mean? Here's a little bit different. You go over there,
and none of it's real. Right? So especially if you care to like really get into like the nitty gritty and lose like some sleep over going over the mountain of data that's kind of required to do something like that, and on so many different levels. So, but the fingerprints of the same characters are behind the scenes. They always show up everywhere. So you remember every time that there's some type of quote unquote crisis, there's always like this rhetoric about don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? So that is kind of like exoteric stuff, right? So, but if you've been involved in the planning of it, and it's demonstrable that or demonstrable that you can actually go through and show, like, hey, like you had a hand in this here, you had a hand in this here. This is you doing this.
That reminds me of something else that we have to say. Sorry, I cut you off. But so when you say esoteric, exoteric, and then the hand, all that stuff, another thing we want to cover probably under Cyvilan Podcast would be all these symbols and symbonologies, right?
Yeah.
So hidden hand would be part of that esoteric and exoteric. I'm going to tell you something else too, but I have something hidden in my pocket. That's what I actually want to do, you know? So we'll get into all that stuff too.
Yeah, all the symbols, like in communist subversion, the symbols reveal who they actually are, right? So with the secret social societies, right? So Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, he would say, like, hey, we don't have a need for like any secret handshakes or secret. So Quigley is actually talking about Rhodes when in Tragedy and Hope, where he's like, oh, they don't have a need for all, because most of those guys that are at that level, they all know each other, right? So they're good business buddies, right? So they're on a first name basis. So there's no need for any of that type of stuff, right? But
if every time I see you, I wouldn't introduce myself every time we go for a handshake.
So we know it. Right? So, but when you're creating these subgroups in multiple roundtable affiliates, you kind of need those type of things to kind of keep some semblance of like who's initiated and who's not. Because if you're initiated, and then with this we'll kind of cover some of the stuff like what that actually means, because you have Manly P. Hall, who writes The Secret Destiny of America and the Secret Teaching of All Ages. So he has a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, there's a bunch of quotes you can pull from there saying like the rites or the initiation rites that they go through, the people are looking for meaning within them, and those, they're specific in that that to know that you're initiated isn't that you know something by that initiation. It's just a way to kind of like get more and more and more and more hooks into you, right? So it's not that the initiation has some type of like something that gets endowed to you or any mystical sense, right? So it's just a way to keep the order, right? So if you remember, it was Cecil Rhodes who said he wanted to model all of this stuff after the Jesuit order because of the amount of organizational structure that they have, right? So but yeah, that these type of structures exist, and they seem to be outside the peripheral vision of most people. So this job of the Cyvilan Podcast is to kind of bring this type of thing to light. So yeah.
Whether you want it or not, it will affect you, right? So I lived in the world of like, who cares that happens there? It's like you never, and then you slowly start getting into. Once you get into it, like it affects like in every, know. So if they have the type of control that they can say you can no longer, your money that you've been working for, saving up for whatever, no longer you can access to it and stuff like that.
Right.
At that point now, it's just like it's war. When you go after somebody.
Right. So now, I mean, imagine when that becomes a reality for other people than the Canadian people or anybody who kind of helped out with the trucker convoy,
which is the crazy part, right? So you can say, okay, you can name call these people, put them in a certain bucket, and then start doing whatever you wanted to them. And it seems like most of them would be okay with it. They're just a hindrance. They're there, then they honking and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But then when you start going after people that support them, which is like, hey, I have $50 and I see what you're doing, and here it is, and then they can find you and then make an example out of you. That's all it is.
But it's so you think of like. Remember, we have the 5 eyes, the 7 eyes, the 9 eyes, the 14 eyes alliance, right? Is currently where it's at, and that's old data, right? So maybe it's the 40 eyes. I don't know yet, right? So you go, wait a minute. So
now they have an all-seeing eye, probably.
Remember Eagle Eye? That was the whole idea of Eagle Eye, right? So, if they have this type of capability through the National Reconnaissance Office sharing all this information with all these intelligence services, it wouldn't be anything for the Canadian government to be like, hey, without even having to go to the company, they would probably already know where all the contributions came from. They could pinpoint everybody on a Google map, and so to know where the technology is. This is the whole idea behind the legislation that gets passed in the United States after 119. You get this idea of like, hey, we're trying to get the laws, the legal system to catch up to where the technology was, right? So if you think when the internet first popped up on the scene for commercial use, you have all this all these ideas or these legalities that needed to be worked out for like intellectual property rights, right? So who owns the data, and that's going to be an interesting thing that pops up because the Human Genome Projects and stuff like that kind of like led to some other laws that needed to be passed. But you get this idea of like the legalities need to catch up to where the technology is, because we're going to do something different with this next phase. Now that we can surveil everything and we can kind of like pinpoint every single data point that can pop up on whatever medium, whether it be like your cell phone, you send a text message, a telephone call, a landline call, it doesn't matter. Once we have the capability to do that, you gotta take that to the next step. It's one thing to surveil. Imagine like a sniper out in the field, like he can look, he can do reconnaissance all day long, but
never pull the trigger.
Yeah. So now you put that second piece, right? So now we're gonna put the laws in place to coerce your body to be able to.
Yeah.
And this is the arm that we saw with the outbreak, right? So now putting the laws on the books that say, hey, like they do in Australia, like, hey, you have to check in every so often with this app, and we can tell if like you're at your household or if you those type of things.
They had an interesting name. I think it was like a wellness
check.
Wellness check. Yeah. So the idea is there is an app. It will send you a random. You have to check in, and within 15 minutes, if you don't take a picture of your face to show that it's you and send a geolocation.
Yeah, because when you send the image, your geolocation is in the image, it's embedded in the metadata.
Yeah, so if you don't do that, they're going to assume that you're not okay, something happened to you, and the police will show up.
Yeah,
that's the idea, right?
Yeah, nonsense. I mean, of course, it's all for your safety.
Yeah, of course,
we want you to be safe, right? like the serum, we want it to be safe and effective.
Steroids.
So there's, we can, we have a 70-page slide that we're on page 3 on.
Yeah, and we're already over an hour, so it was probably like a good spot to end this one.
Yeah.
And, probably we'll pick up on the next one where we start off.
Yeah, so this is a good introduction into the Cyvilan Podcast and the kind of ideas that we're going to cover. We want to put it in like a succinct format so that if you're watching the earlier versions of this, you're going to get like the grassroots stuff that kind of that build over time rather than like jumping from topic to topic. And so that you can, if you're wondering like, hey, where's this piece of data that I heard you guys talk about? It's probably going to be like earlier on in the videos, and we got to figure out our naming convention for each one of these. And
we're trying to. It's I guess we're now podcasters, but we're trying to. We'll get better at this too. Make sure that everything is a little bit better structured, where easy to follow too.
Yeah.
Our conversations usually are very chaotic, and then just jump. We can start somewhere, end up with who knows where.
Yeah.
So we'll try to be a little bit more structured, where it's easy to follow, and make sure that we have all the good information.
Yeah.
Try to cut out all the fat too and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's another thing. Cut out all the fat in between. And so, like we always say, like it'd be good if somebody had already made like some type of repository where you can go and like all of the stuff is. I've seen a ton of sites, and I have like probably as many as can be Googled bookmarks.
On like somewhere. 3 computers opened. Yeah. So like there's a Google Chrome open with full tabs,
400 tabs, 200 tabs. One is like, man, no wonder my computer's dying. So to bring things, I guess, to a close here, this is the first Cyvilan Podcast official. So
you can support this podcast, I guess, this episode by purchasing from Iconic Label, the Cyvilan hoodie. Yeah. I think, this is a... We'll show the back one, too, because it has like a nice big print. Yeah. And then, you can go to Patreon, right?
Yeah, patreon.com/The Iconic Podcast if you want to buy one of the 3D Puff patch.
These are probably my favorite one out of all of them. Yeah. I know you like the white one, but I really like the camo one.
So the camo, the black, and the white are available at theiconiclabel.com. So we spent some time revamping the website. So before it kind of looked like some international website. I think it threw people off. Like, what is this? So but now it's more conducive to what we're doing.
We're physically involved in when it comes to the whole aspect of it, designing, printing, not printing, but pressing and all that stuff, and shipping out. Yeah.
Right. So it's going to be our physical hands that are putting the product together and sending it out.
And now we're offering I guess like will be like on-screen selection too, so that you can get the hoodie and the hat for where you can save about 10%.
Yeah, 10%. Yeah. So if you get a hoodie and a hat together, it's a package that's on the front end of the site that you can just click on that and go through and so we have it's mobile friendly. So if you wanted to purchase mobile, it's fine too.
So with that being said, all the other links would be below in the description. Make sure you follow everywhere, at least like the Rumble, Instagram, and all that, because anytime any of this can go, and then we're like, we
just have to re-upload
it's kind of like on a daily basis. Oh, this one got, or at least back when we were uploading,
So that was a pain in the
So make sure you're following everywhere, and then with that being said,
and that's about it.